Morning my husband walked out, I was still in the hospital gown they've given me after the biopsy. Not a metaphor. Literally still wearing it. The little blue and white thing that ties at the back and doesn't quite close all the way. I was sitting on the edge of the examination table when the nurse came in with my discharge papers, and I remember thinking I should probably change before he arrived to pick me up. I didn't want him to see me like that. Small, paper-thin, half-open at the back. He never came. He sent a text instead. I still have it, not because I saved it on purpose, but because I've never been able to make myself delete it. It said, "I can't do this, Cass. I've been trying to find a way to say this for months. I'm sorry. I hope you get better. I really do. I hope you get better." Like I had a cold. I stood in that hallway at St. Michael's in Toronto with my coat half-buttoned and my discharge papers in my hand, and I read those 12 words 4 times. Then I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, sat on a bench near the front doors, and watched taxis pull in and out for I don't know how long. A woman next to me was eating a Tim Hortons bagel. It smelled like everything was normal. It smelled like the world had not just rearranged itself completely. My diagnosis was early-stage breast cancer. The oncologist had used words like excellent prognosis and high survival rate and very treatable. He'd been almost cheerful about it, the way doctors get when the numbers are on your side. I'd held it together in his office. I'd asked the right questions, taken notes in my phone, thanked him for his time. I was 31 years old and I'd just been told I had cancer, and I'd thanked the doctor like he'd done me a favor at a restaurant. My husband and I had been married for 4 years, together for 7. We'd talked about kids. We'd bought a condo in Leslieville. We had a shared Spotify account and a weekend routine that involved the St. Minnie, Lawrence Market and strong coffee, and the crossword puzzle in the Globe and Mail, which he was much better at than me, and made a point of reminding me every single Sunday. He left the day I got my diagnosis. I want to be clear about that because when I've told people this story, there is a tendency to soften it, to say he left around the time of the diagnosis or it was a difficult period for both of them. No. The day I got the diagnosis, that specific Tuesday in November, is the day he sent the text. I've never been able to determine whether he was waiting for a reason or whether the cancer specifically was the thing that broke him. I've stopped trying to figure it out. It doesn't change anything either way. What I can tell you is what I did next. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my best friend. I sat on that bench near the front doors of the hospital until I felt something shift inside me. Not strength exactly. Not courage. Something more like a decision. The kind you don't make with your brain. The kind that arrives in your body first. I called a cab. I went home. I walked through our condo. His coffee cup still in the sink, his running shoes still by the door, his half of the closet still full. And I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table, and I opened my laptop and I started reading about treatment options, timelines, and clinical trials at Princess Margaret. I made a spreadsheet. I booked a follow-up appointment. I sent an email to my manager saying I'd need to adjust my schedule for the next few months. I did not call him back. I want to explain something about myself, and I want to be honest about it even though it doesn't paint me in the most sympathetic light. I am a tax accountant. I have been, since I was 24 years old, the kind of person who responds to chaos by making lists, who processes grief by calculating risk, who, when her world falls apart, opens a new tab and starts a spreadsheet. I don't know if that makes me cold or just practical. Probably both. Probably it doesn't matter. What matters is that 6 weeks after my husband left, at my second appointment with my oncologist, I sat in the waiting room next to a man in his late 60s who was wearing a very good suit and reading the Financial Times on his phone. He had the posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime not apologizing for taking up space. He glanced at my folder, the thick kind they give you when you have a lot of appointments ahead of you, and he said without any preamble, "First rodeo." I looked at him. "Second. You?" "Third," he said. "Different kind each time? My body's an entrepreneur. Keeps pivoting. I laughed. I hadn't laughed in 6 weeks. It came out strange and startled, like a sound I'd forgotten how to make. His name was Douglas. He was 68 years old. He was the retired founder of a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm headquartered in Mississauga, and he had come to every single one of his cancer appointments alone for the past 2 years because, as he told me with a complete absence of self-pity, my son is useless at this kind of thing, and I don't want to make it about him. His son's name was Marcus. I didn't know that yet. I didn't ask. We talked about the wait times at the clinic, and the coffee on the 4th floor being marginally better than the coffee on the 2nd floor. We went into our respective appointments. We did not exchange numbers. But the clinic is small, and the waiting room is the same waiting room every time, and 3 weeks later, he was there again with his Financial Times and his excellent suit. And I was there with my folder and my spreadsheet and a thermos of better coffee than anything they had on any floor of that building. I brought him a cup without asking. He accepted it without making a thing of it. After that, it was just what we did. I should say, because I know what you're thinking, and I thought it too, about myself, there was nothing romantic about any of this. Douglas was 37 years older than me. He was in the middle of his 3rd cancer diagnosis. He reminded me, in a very specific way, of the grandfather I'd been close to before he died when I was 12. That's the whole of it. What he was honest. And in a period of my life when I had been told I hope you get better by the person who is supposed to be my person, honest felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. He asked me once, about 3 months in, why I always came to my appointments alone. I told him my husband had left when I was diagnosed. I said it plainly, the way I'd been practicing saying it, because I'd found that if I said it plainly, people didn't make the face I couldn't stand, the face of, oh, you poor thing. They just took it as information. Douglas took it as information. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, my son left his wife 2 weeks after their daughter was born. Packed a bag, said he wasn't ready. Went to stay with a friend in Vancouver. I didn't speak to him for 8 months. I didn't say anything. He came back, Douglas said. He always comes back when he needs something. That's the shape of him. I didn't ask anything, but I filed it away, the way I file away everything, quietly, in a folder I can find later. What I didn't know, in those early months, was that Douglas was filing things away too. The treatments were hard. I won't pretend they weren't. There were mornings I couldn't get out of bed and afternoons I spent on the bathroom floor of my condo in Leslieville, wishing someone was there and simultaneously glad no one was, because there is a particular kind of dignity in suffering that only holds up if no one is watching. I kept working, part-time at first, then almost full-time by month 4. My manager was kind. My colleague sent a plant I named Gerald, and talked to occasionally when the condo felt too quiet. My mother came from Ottawa for 2 weeks in January. She cooked and cleaned and cried quietly in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't hear her. I let her because I understood she needed to do something with the fear, and there wasn't much else I could offer her. She asked about my husband once, carefully, and I said we're handling it, and she let it go. She's always known when I've decided something. I decided something. I don't know exactly when it happened. Somewhere between month 2 and month 4, in the waiting room at Princess Margaret, in the conversations with Douglas that had expanded from coffee to occasional lunch, I had quietly, without announcing it to anyone, decided. My husband would come back. I knew him well enough to know that. He was not a cruel person, just a weak one. And weak people tend to return when the scary part is over, and they imagine the ordinary life is still available to them. He would come back when I was better, when the worst was past, when he could tell himself the story in a way that made him forgivable. And I was going to be ready. I want to be careful about how I tell this part because I've been called calculating for it, and I don't think that's wrong exactly, but I also don't think it's the whole truth. I was protecting myself. I was protecting the life I was going to have after. And I had spent 31 years being the kind of person who made spreadsheets in crisis, and I was not about to change now. Douglas had, over our months of conversation, told me more than he probably realized about his business affairs. Not because I asked. I want to be clear about that. But because that's how he processed things. He talked through problems out loud. He'd semi-retired, but he still held significant positions on 2 boards. Still had a portfolio he managed personally. Still had, as he put it, more money than my son will ever deserve and no one sensible to leave it to. He said it like a joke. I understood it wasn't entirely one. In month 5, when my prognosis had upgraded to excellent and I was starting to feel like a person again, rather than a collection of symptoms, Douglas asked me if I'd ever considered consulting work. He had a situation, a mess, really, left over from a partnership dissolution, that required someone with detailed knowledge of Canadian tax law and a willingness to look at a very complicated set of documents without flinching. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was good at it, and the work gave me something to do with my brain that wasn't waiting. I was good at it in ways that surprised even Douglas, who had not, I think, expected to be surprised. I found 3 significant errors in the original partnership agreement that had been missed by 2 previous lawyers. I drafted a restructuring recommendation that his accountant later told him saved the estate a considerable amount in probate exposure. I did it methodically, thoroughly, without drama. Douglas looked at my summary document and said, "You're wasted in personal tax." "I know," I said, "but it pays well and I set my own hours." He laughed. Then he was quiet for a moment and he said, "My son is going to come back eventually. He always does. I want you to know that I don't intend to make it easy for him." I looked at him. "I didn't ask you to do anything." "No," he said, "but you're the only person who's come to those appointments every week and not made it about themselves. That's worth something to me." I didn't argue. I understood that some gifts come without a bow, and you either take them or you don't. Over the following year, I did more consulting work for Douglas. I met his accountant, his estate lawyer, 2 of his former business partners. I was introduced simply as a colleague. No one asked questions. Douglas ran his affairs the way he ran everything, with a minimum of explanation and an assumption that the people around him would keep up. I kept up. I finished my treatment in month 9. The scans were clear. My oncologist used the word remission in a tone that suggested he was very pleased with both of us. I went home that evening, sat in my kitchen, and allowed myself to cry for the first time since the bench outside St. Michael's. Not sad crying, something else, the kind that doesn't have a clean name. Marcus came back on a Thursday afternoon in April, 2 years and 4 months after he'd left. I knew before he knocked, because he'd emailed the week before. A long email, 3 paragraphs. He'd done the work. He'd been in therapy. He understood now that his response to my diagnosis had been a failure, a profound failure, and he was not asking me to forgive him immediately, just to give him the chance to show he'd changed. He was back in Toronto. He was ready. He used the word ready twice. I read the email once, replied with a single line, "You can come by Thursday at 2, and went back to the document I'd been working on. He looked good. That was the first thing I noticed, and I want to be honest about the fact that I noticed it, because I think pretending otherwise would be dishonest. He'd clearly been taking care of himself. He was nervous. He stood in my doorway, our old doorway, except it wasn't ours anymore. It had been mine for 2 years. And he looked around at the condo the way people look at a place they thought they knew, and don't quite recognize. I'd repainted, I'd replaced the couch. His coffee cup was gone. I offered him a seat at the kitchen table. I made tea. I let him talk. He talked for a long time. He explained the therapy, the realization, the work he'd done on himself. He said all the right things in all the right order. He was articulate and sincere and visibly remorseful, and somewhere around the 12-minute mark, I understood something I hadn't quite allowed myself to understand before. I did not want him back. Not because I hated him, not because I couldn't forgive him. I think I had, actually, somewhere in year 1, just as a practical matter, because carrying it around was expensive and I had other things to do with my energy. But because I had, in 2 years of treatment and recovery, and spreadsheets in waiting rooms and Douglas's complicated estates, become someone who did not fit the shape of the life he was describing. The crossword puzzle in the Globe and Mail on Sunday mornings. The condo, the shared Spotify account. I was 33 years old. I had survived cancer. I had learned that I could sit in a hospital waiting room alone for 9 months and be okay. More than okay. I had learned that I was, without anyone, enough. I let him finish. Then I said very carefully, "I'm glad you did the work. I mean that. But I'm not the same person you left, and I don't think what you're describing is what I want anymore." He went still. He prepared for not yet. He hadn't prepared for no. "Is there someone else?" he asked. "No," I said. And then, because I've always preferred clarity, "There's just me. And that's the problem, from your perspective. I'm enough for me now." He left an hour later, not angry. He didn't have the energy for anger, I think. Or maybe the therapy had genuinely taken the edge off. He looked more confused than anything else. Like he'd driven to a destination and found the building was gone. I stood at the kitchen window after he left and watched him walk to his car. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and sent Douglas's estate lawyer the revised document he'd been waiting for. 3 weeks later, Douglas asked me to join the board of his family foundation as the financial oversight lead. It wasn't a dramatic offer. He made it between bites of the soup we'd taken to having at the deli near the clinic, which we still visited twice a year even though neither of us was in active treatment. Old habit. Good soup. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I want to tell you what I think people misunderstand about this story, because I've told it in pieces to a few people, and I can see the moment they start sorting it into a category. Either I'm a victim who survived, which is true but not the whole truth, or I'm someone who manipulated a sick old man, which is not true at all. The truth is, Douglas was not naive. He was one of the least naive people I've ever met. He chose to bring me into his professional life because he saw someone who showed up, did the work, and didn't make things about herself. That's the whole of it. Whatever security I've built in the years since has come from being useful, being honest, and being the kind of person who brings the better coffee without being asked. My husband, ex-husband, since the divorce came through 16 months after he sent the text, thought he was coming back to retrieve something he'd left behind. He found out I wasn't an object. I hadn't stayed in the drawer waiting. I'd been out in the world, doing things. I don't think about him very often now. When I do, it's not with bitterness. It's more like the feeling you get when you drive past a neighborhood you used to live in. Familiar. Smaller than you remembered. A place that was yours once and isn't anymore, and that's fine, because where you are now has better light. The foundation work is real work. Good work. Last year, we funded 3 community health programs in underserved areas of the GTA. I sit on 2 other boards now. I still do my own taxes, partly out of habit, and partly because I don't entirely trust anyone else to do it right. Gerald the plant is still alive, barely, but still. And on Sunday mornings, I make my own coffee, strong, and I do the crossword in the Globe and Mail. And I realize, significantly better at it now than I ever was when I was doing it with someone else. I don't know what that means. Maybe it means I was always going to be this person and just needed the space to become her. Maybe it means grief is sometimes the most efficient route from who you were to who you needed to be. Maybe it just means I'm better at crosswords than I thought. Either way, I'm not complaining. I think about the bench outside St. Michael's a lot. Not because it was the worst moment. It wasn't. Not quite. But because of what I did next. I didn't fall apart. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and watched taxis pull in and out until something in me settled into a decision I couldn't fully name yet. That moment, I've come to realize, is where the story actually starts. Not with his text. Not with the text. Not with the diagnosis. With that quiet, ugly decision to keep going anyway. There's something I used to believe about fairness, that if you did things right, if you showed up and worked hard and loved people honestly, the world would more or less hold up its end. My husband leaving the day I was diagnosed broke that belief completely. And I'm grateful for it now, strange as that sounds, because what replaced it was something more useful. The understanding that outcomes aren't promised, but choices still matter. Every single one of them. Douglas used to say that character is just behavior under pressure, repeated until it becomes habit. I didn't agree with him at first. It sounded too neat, too management consultant, but I watched him go to his appointments alone, make clear-eyed decisions about his estate, keep his sense of humor through his third diagnosis, and I started to think he might be right. What he modeled, without ever stating it as a lesson, was that integrity doesn't require an audience. You do the right thing because it's the right thing, and you do it especially when no one is watching and no one would blame you for doing otherwise. I could have been bitter. I had every reason. And there were months. The bad months. The bathroom floor months when bitterness would have been completely understandable. But bitterness is expensive. It costs you focus. And focus was the only real resource I had. So I made a choice, over and over, to put my energy into the work in front of me instead of the man who'd left. That's not virtue. That's just arithmetic. You only have so much to spend. The intelligence part, and I mean that in the broadest sense, not just being good at tax law, was learning to read situations for what they were, rather than what I wanted them to be. My husband came back because he'd done the work on himself and genuinely believed the life we'd had was still available. He wasn't lying. He just hadn't accounted for the fact that I'd changed shape entirely. I had to be honest about that, which meant being honest that what I wanted at 33 was not what I'd wanted at 29, and that there was no version of going backward that served either of us. And the persistence, showing up to those appointments, finishing the consulting work when I was exhausted, rebuilding my professional life from a part-time schedule in year 1. That wasn't heroic. It was just what getting through looks like from the inside. Quiet, repetitive, not particularly cinematic. What I know now is that the 2 years my husband was gone were not wasted years. They were the years I became the person who could sit across from him at that kitchen table and say, calmly and without cruelty, that I didn't want him back. That kind of clarity doesn't come from nothing. It comes from showing up to your own life, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Until you know exactly what you're made of. Gerald the plant is still alive. That feels important somehow. I'm not sure why.